Welcome everyone. My name is Steve Torsa. I'm the founder and managing director of Wholesale Investor. Obviously, I've started doing this session about raising capital. And now some of you I haven't come across before and don't know. Some of you may have actually been to my sessions before. So look, the reason, just to give you some context, the reason why I started doing this was I was going through my own capital raising processes, and I just really understood, like I felt the frustration that every company feels when going through this process. And I also realized there was a lot of things that I experienced that no one was really talking about. So I think the simplest way to put it is I wanted to start doing these education workshops to really sort of provide people and sort of guide through the process of actually raising capital, and also to demystify it. Now, the way I love to make these sessions, and just to be super clear from the outset, the reason why I do this is not because I think I'm such an amazing person at raising capital, right? The reason why I do this is because I want to encourage people to learn from the mistakes I've made. I want you to encourage you from the mistakes that I've seen our clients make. And also I want you to learn from the things that I've done well, and also from others, what others have done well, right? And also to be blunt, I got to the point where I realized actually no one really wants to teach the actual process for raising capital. The best you're going to get is, how to raise capital from a VC, right? Which is just such a minute sort of way of thinking about raising capital. It can be super important for some companies, but when you understand, when I go through this entire presentation, you'll actually get the idea. So really important. I love engagement, right? Engagement is really good for me, and I love to interact as I'm going through it. You'll notice a light, by the way, going on and off whilst I'm actually talking. It's just my sensors in my office. But yeah, I love engagement. So please ask questions whilst we're going through. I'll do my best to answer it. And also one of the things I do love at the start of this, I know there's some people mentioned I actually love knowing where you're from. Each of these workshops I've done, there's been a minimum of 10 different countries represented in it. So just whilst I'm chatting away, in the chat box, just put where you're actually joining the workshop from. I love everyone seeing that, from the different places around Australia and also around the world that people are joining from. And yeah, Singapore has been very dominant. Welcome, Michael from Sydney. Welcome, Christian from Singapore. Brisbane, Singapore again, fantastic. Perth, good to see. Sam from Sydney. Shane, long time, mate. Known you a very, very long time. Welcome. Okay, and then Brisbane, right? I said the funniest one, I can't, was it? I had people joining from South America. I had someone joining at 3:30 a.m. in the morning, which was just nuts. Peter, welcome from Sydney. All right, so I'm going to kick off whilst everyone's still writing, and just obviously welcome. Who is this session for? Really simply, I did this for three main reasons, right? One, I want to help companies going through the capital raising process, especially if you're thinking about it in the next sort of 12 to 24 months. I also want to help investors that are looking to assist their clients or assist their investee companies in the capital raising process. Welcome, Lucia from the Central Coast. And also I want to assist advisors as well, because, a lot of advisors are working, especially that are professionals in this space. They're starting the process of working with clients. So I really want to help go through that process. Now, someone like Shane, who's on here, he would be the master of raising capital and thinking, I should be running this alongside Stephen. You're probably accurate with that, Shane. Okay, so who is it not for? And Tom as well, I've obviously known you for quite a long time as well, Tom, and obviously you've got an extremely good amount of experience in capital raising. And then the last one is, this is not for companies that are looking to raise in the next month. This is really about building a capital raising process. I've created a bonus for the session, and I'll talk about how to actually get access to that. So at the end, I'm going to give you some guidance on how to get access to our bonus for the session. It's really around how founders can achieve high valued exits with their business. So the agenda is going to be very straightforward. It's firstly just going to be a bit of an introduction from me. Then obviously we get into the capital raising workshop. Then I'll be diving into sort of understanding investors and typically what drives them. And then I'll be, a lot of people ask about the opportunities to work with WI and participate in our activities. So I'll provide some coverage of that at the end of the session. The reason why we're actually doing this, I sort of highlighted this from the start. Effectively, we found out, last year that 75% of the companies that we work with are going to manage the capital raising themselves. And then more than that, we found out that, only basically less than 20% will be using an advisor. So having someone third party run the capital raising process for them. And then 15% basically have got a board member assisting them. So we just realized there's a massive growing trend that founders and teams and really boards are looking to drive the capital raising process themselves. And let's be honest, not everyone's skilled in doing this, and this is not everyone's day job. So we want to do our best to at least provide education and awareness about the process to actually go through. The next step, sorry, just my slides. The reasons why we're doing this is, number one, I just want to normalize the experience for most founders, and I'll cover why. Understand and sort of manage the emotional aspects. Also, just some simple tools that can assist in the process. And then lastly, I just want you to really help from my experiences. And as I said, I am not doing these because I am the greatest capital raiser you'll ever meet. I am doing this because I have made so many mistakes, and effectively, I just want to share in, I've been fortunate enough to obviously raise a significant amount of capital for my company, and we've seen a lot raised for our clients. So it's really about sort of sharing those lessons of what we learned. Welcome, David. That's a good point. Let me just check. Is it being recorded? Yes, for once I'm actually recording this. So what typically happens at this point is I plan to record it and then I don't record it, but I'm actually recording it. I am going to share this, but I'm literally only going to make it available for a couple of days because I'm actually showing some basically insights into my personal deal room. So people do get upset when I take it down, but effectively this is my personal stuff. And I said, you'll see that I'm actually giving you insights into my deal room and the process I actually use. So I really just want to make it available for the people that are obviously making the time to join and participate in these activities. So I hope everyone can understand that. Now, as I said, you may have just joined. Please, I want to make this as free flowing as possible. The ultimate outcome that we want to help is we just basically want to help people raise money as efficiently as possible whilst basically reducing the frustration. I'm not sure why that's sort of gone a bit strange on my screen. But yeah, for me, one of the questions I get asked, and I like just to remove a lot of the BS that sort of goes along with this, in the sense that, no, I didn't come from a wealthy family. No, I didn't go to a top private school. No, I didn't go to a top university. And no, I didn't go to university at all. True founder story, built my own networks, and also built all the positioning for WI over the last 10 to 12 years. And I think that's important because a lot of you may have some of those questions about yourself, as you're going through this own process. My personal background, I was involved in a lot of marketing consulting and also corporate advisory. And then what's led to the launch of WI. So my first love was marketing, and then I discovered innovation. And then obviously you probably sort of, my love for innovation took over, but obviously my skill set in the marketing area is what you see basically is the drive behind Wholesale Investor, to give you an idea. So for me now, obviously Wholesale Investor is my main drive, and obviously we've been building CRISP. I'm fortunate enough to count Investec and BMYG as shareholders, and also a Canadian venture group called INP Capital, which also has a representative in Australia as well. And then also we've built WI to have over 30,000 subscribers. And I've got shareholders now from 7 different countries, which is, I think, is important because all of those actually come through my own database. But I like to provide that as a context because whilst I'm talking about all the things that all the mistakes I've made, obviously I've been able to raise capital and bring on shareholders in the process. Obviously, just a bit about WI. I'm not going to have to speak too much to that, and also a little bit about CRISP. Just a high level, the reason why we built CRISP, and you'll see some screenshots of the platform as I go through my presentation, is that I just realized that it's crazy how much money gets invested into companies, into driving different platforms and technology and so forth, but no one's actually really investing in this underlying software that can actually drive capital raising. So everything we build with CRISP is basically about how to actually streamline the capital raising process. And effectively what we are driving towards is AI-driven matchmaking and digital investment banking tools for not just founders, but for the entire ecosystem as well. Our vision for the company, and I think this is important so you can understand where I'm coming from, everything we do is about creating opportunities for tomorrow. Every presentation, every workshop, every email I send, every conference I hold, hold is about creating something which doesn't exist. That's what fires me up. That's what fuels me. And also that's what our team works towards as well. We know that we deal in one of the hardest spaces that there is, but we obviously love what we do and we're passionate about creating those opportunities. From a mission standpoint, it's how do we actually bring together, we're always looking for ways to efficiently utilize technology platforms and partners to bring together companies and also investors as well. Right? We are not perfect, but absolutely we do everything we can to keep on improving in the process and keep on learning from our clients' experiences. And I'm sure if anyone's been in this space for any period of time, you'll realize that, you know, it is a hard area, but we're always looking to refine and improve. And as we always say from the team, we will do whatever we can to assist companies where we can. Our experience, just to give you some perspective, we've basically raised capital and worked with every different sector, right from some of the hardest, more sort of technical business in the life science area, right through to death tech as an area, which, you know, some people didn't even, like, we actually helped coin that as an area. So just checking a question. Francis, straight off the bat, what is the most capital ever raised for an investment company? Was it Qbiotics? No, it wasn't, Francis. The most has been so far 34 million. How's the COVID affected capital raising in general? So I'll cover that actually as part of my conversation, Francis, just so you know. Okay, opportunities we're featured. We've worked with companies pretty much at every stage, and clients. You know, typically what we see with companies, we've seen from private investors investing anywhere from 25 to 250K, right through, it's actually now 34 million as they've attracted some additional capital. And we've basically seen everything in between. One of the most known ones that sort of publicly talked about was obviously the assistance with the 20 million raised via Booktopia. And that was after they went through a series of challenges with raising, and obviously everyone would have seen them successfully list at the end of last year. Hi, Sam. Thanks for the hello. And if anyone else is joining from other countries, please let us know. So far, we've got Singapore and Australia. If there's any European titles, please let me know. But I assume you're probably sleeping if from the European side. But literally the reason I show that is I just want to answer the question straight off the bat is that yes, we're likely we've worked with someone like you. Just to cover that off, you know, a lot of people have these little intricates. Oh, have you worked with a life science company working in this specific? And it's like, really from our perspective, we just break it down to sectors. We know typically investors operate within sectors, and, you know, pretty much every sector we've had some success in. Okay, so I hope that's good enough from a foundation perspective, nice and short. Now we actually get into the workshop. And as I said, please, I'm happy to make it as engaging as possible as we're going through. Okay, so the first one I just want to kick off with is some of the myths when it comes to raising capital. So this is quite frustrating for me because typically it often comes from the advisory and the sort of investment community, where what I typically find happens is that people tend to try and pressure founders in that what you need to do is you need to raise capital within a 2 to 3 month period. Otherwise you are not, you know, otherwise you feel like you're not successful. There's something wrong with your offer. Now, I also had this situation where my own shareholders put this pressure on me. And when I spoke to other founders, I just realized it wasn't the case. So the first myth I'd just love to highlight and just put you at ease is that fewer than 5% of companies are actually able to complete an end-to-end capital raising in under 2 months. And if ever anyone actually asks you this question, then my thing that I'll highlight, because I did this with my shareholders, where I just said, okay, out of curiosity, how many investee companies do you have that have been able to successfully raise capital in 2 to 3 months? And they actually couldn't think of one. So I'll just highlight to you that this is not the case, right? You will made to feel like there's something wrong with you if you can't get it done in that period of time. But just to be absolutely clear, there's very few, and typically it's special circumstances as to what that happened. Okay, so just Aziz's question, what industry do you feel will be the more favorable one to invest in? Obviously, I'm not making investment bets on this. Given it's a capital raising workshop, Tisha, I'm not making investment bets on this webinar. And Kangpo, yes, I'll be recording for people. I'll be sharing the recordings for people that join, but it will be open for only 48 hours. Okay, the next one is that people have this belief that advisors and investment banks and so forth are using special kind of software or analytics to run their deals. The reality is they actually aren't. And I've seen this with some of my shareholders where they're typically driving their deals actually just off Excel spreadsheets and emails. And funny enough, I find that some groups aren't even using email analytics to see how sort of email open rates and so forth as they're driving through their process. So for me, I'll give you some interesting fact is that when I was going through the investment process with Investec, I understood how interested they were because every email I'd send was being opened from 30 to 60 times. And that was super interesting for me because I thought, Jesus, you know, what is happening in this actual process? And that was a good example for me. But when you see, as I go through the presentation, analytics can really make life so much easier for us as founders because otherwise you're just operating in the dark. And really, for most people, they are actually operating in the dark when it comes to capital raising. Now, the next myth is my favorite one, and it's one that most people are surprised to bring about because, look, 90% of media attention is covered by this, where they feel that VCs are actually the main investors in this space. Well, the reality is that VCs will invest in less than 1 in 100 companies that they actually come across. More than that, I've come across VCs that invest in 1 in 1,000 companies. So if VCs are investing less than 1 in 100 and some at 1 in 1,000, who the hell is investing into all these companies that are actually raising capital? And that's why I'm doing this presentation. This presentation is, you know, what I've seen working with high net worth investors, family offices, corporate investors, etc. And that is where the dominant amounts of capital, and then moving into the actual ecosystem itself, that's where you see the dominant amounts of capital raised come from. I love putting up this slide because I think it really highlights, you know, the day in the life of us, you know, as a founder, or as, you know, for the advisors that are on here, as you're working with your investee companies, this is basically our life. You know, it's an emotional roller coaster. And it's one of those things when an investor tells you that they're going to go ahead, you feel like you're up here, you feel like you're bulletproof, right? And when an investor tells you that they're not going to go ahead for whatever reason, you feel like you're this big. And it's this game and this dance that the entire ecosystem plays. And the reason I communicate this is because, number one, it's my reminder to myself, being as blunt as possible. And also it's a reminder to you that this is normal. When someone rejects you, it's actually normal to feel like a piece of shit, you know? And I think that's just reassuring to know, because every single day we're going to wake up, we're going to put on our different, whether it be a suit or outfit, whatever you wear but most importantly, you got to feel like you got to put on bulletproof confidence when you're going through this process. The reality is every success story that you see about raising money, just know that they're going through a similar level of shit that what you're going through in going through the cap raising process. In fact, there is not one person that I've met that goes, do you know what? I absolutely love the capital raising process, right? Just to be really clear, right? There's no one that I've met that likes it, and it is an actual emotional journey. So I really like to highlight that. And for me, you know, obviously I get the opportunity to have a lot of conversations with investors, and investors will always say to me, Steve, I want you to introduce me to the good deals. And then likewise, I'll just turn back and say, well, please explain to me what a good deal is. And I think that's really important for you as someone that's raising money or thinking about it, is to understand that not every good deal is a great deal for a specific investor. Every investor has their own version of what a good deal is, and every investor has their own thesis behind why they're investing into certain companies. In fact, for me, when I have conversations with investors, I just ask them, you know, what is their thesis for my space? And the reason is because I've received plenty of rejections from VCs and different investors where they actually think that the capital raising process is there's no problem with it. Like I actually did a LinkedIn post saying there is no problem with the capital raising process. And because I've had VCs ask me, what is the problem I'm solving? So if you want to understand what ignorance looks like and understand if you're at the top of the tree, you know, when you're being pitched opportunities all the time, they don't understand the challenges that we face as founders going through a capital raising process. And that leads on to the companies where they say, oh, I just want to be introduced to the good investors. Said, well, you know, we can do that, but how do you know that they'll be interested in you? Because as I said, every investor has their own thesis and their own specific area that they're looking to target, right? So as I said, when I speak with investors now, I ask them what they see as the challenges with our space, because if they don't see any challenges, I know that they're not likely going to be an investor for my business, right? And I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that not everyone is suited to your business as a potential investor. Now, I love this example to kick off with, because everyone in Australia pretty much, and most people know Blackbird, right? And they know them as the success story they are. Now they've raised I think it's 1.4 or something billion dollars of funds. But what people don't know is with their first fund, it actually took them nearly 2 years to raise that capital. More than that, it was 500 meetings, and they had to speak to, and from 500 meetings, they got 97 investors, and they raised $29 million. And some of you, this will be your first capital raising, maybe it'll be your second capital raising, but either way, it's important to know that these guys, that when Blackbird went to raise capital for the first time, they were already success stories. They were already well known. They were already beacons for the actual space. And yet their conversion rate was still 1 in 5. And when they got those investors, the average investment size was 300K. And I think that's important to put into perspective, right? Where you need to really understand, what this process is and what you're really likely to go through, right? Because the challenge for founders is, what happens is they have this idea that their business is amazing and they're going to shoot out an IM and then money will just come flying back in. And that's not really how it happens. Chris must be coming from the from the investors. How do you deal with egomaniac founders who believe they are the next Elon Musk and refuse to listen to good advice? It's a good point. It's actually quite challenging. We've definitely dealt with that in the past. And I find that, and I'll be blunt, I've often had investors end up coming on board with WI because of my ability to take advice. In fact, in one meeting with an investor initially said no to me. He gave me such good advice and feedback on why he was saying no, that effectively altered some of my thinking around my strategy going forward. And funny enough, he ended up becoming a shareholder. So, and I will actually highlight, I do an advanced capital raising workshop, and I actually cover that as actually part of it. Francis is asking, what is a VC? A venture capital fund, Francis. Okay, so Frank, do you want to ask the technical, I'm just getting asked a legal question. Please feel free to ask that towards the end, because it'll be really helpful for everyone. Are we starting off the debate? How do you tell with arrogant investors with no manners that have watched too much Shark Tank and have no? So look, I learned this, let's sort of go into an investor versus founder debate here. One of my good experiences in dealing with investors, I said, the one, if I actually, a good founder friend of mine, I was asking him, he just had this philosophical approach. He's saying, if they're not right, they're not right. And I'm completely cool with that. And that's why I think what's really nice is to have alignment of thesis. And I'll sort of talk about that as we're going through it. Okay. Now, for the capital raising process, if you've never been through the capital raising process before, I just want to be absolutely clear that it is harder than what you think, right? And it takes longer than what you think. Most people feel like capital raising is going to be like this, where you put out your plan and then money starts flying in the door. That is not how it happens. The reality is you get to a stage where you're feeling like, and you're going through that emotional cycle, right? Because you're investing, you're making decisions to take the company forward, you're accelerating growth plans at the same time, you're still managing capital and all that sort of stuff. I understand that you're going through that process, right? But sometimes it does feel like that from a reality standpoint. Now, I don't know why this has moved slightly, but this slide's just highlighting that capital raising is really just a marketing and sales process. If you actually break it down to its core essence, that's all it is. You get made to feel like it's much more magical than that, but it definitely isn't. So really the marketing process is about attracting people to your opportunity. And then the sales process is really about then converting them into a shareholder. And if you think about it, I learned this from a marketing sort of there's got 3 different stages to it. Firstly, that you've got the awareness stage, right? Then you've got the consideration phase, and then you've got the actual decision-making phase. And it's exactly the same for capital raising as well. And it's nice to think about it like that. And the equivalent I use for people about what capital raising is really like is that, do a raise hand if you've ever done business development or you've hired business developments in the past. Just do a quick raise hand, right? Fantastic. Okay, so most of you, I can see it. My screen is just lighting up with raised hands, which is fantastic. So think about this. Imagine you're bringing on a BD. Imagine you're hiring. They turn up the first day, come into the office, and you're there to greet them. And you just point over to a desk and you say, look, I've just got a desk over there for you. I've put a brochure on that desk, right? What I want you to do is go through that brochure and start selling. Just think about that. Think about that as an induction. So what does that mean? That means that you've hired this new BD, you've given them no defined processes, you've literally just given them a brochure. Let's call it, in our world, a pitch deck. No defined processes, no systems, no scripts, no CRM, and no defined pathway to success, right? Just think about that for a second. And then who's really providing the understanding of what the desires are and the analytics to use, and then sort of ambitions on how you can actually improve the process, right? Because most people, they just keep thinking, well, my business is amazing. Why aren't people giving me money, right? And I said, this is just this constant dance. And if you did that approach where you just sat them down and said, here's your pitch deck, or here's your brochure, go and raise money or go and sell, your likelihood chances of success are very low, right? No different to actually raising capital. And I sort of tell my team about this, that we sort of communicate the Dunning-Kruger effect. And what I love about this is it really illustrates the challenge that we face, when you're going through the capital raising. And once again, just highlighting, this was exactly me, right? So you're basically at this point where your competence is low, but your confidence is high, which means that you believe. And so it's that knowing that you're amazing, but not really having the competence or skill to back it up, right? And I always try and explain where we want to get people to is in this area of the I know nothing. And the reason for that is just trying to basically open your mind up to different processes and a different way in which you can actually think about it, right? And said, only here, I said, there's people that I deal with, and I watch their confidence go like this. There's a guy that I deal with that's, involved in some incredible capital raisings. He's had 6 or 7 successful exits, and said, all it takes is one deal for confidence to be impacted. And it's no different from either side, whether you're the founder or whether you're even on the investor side. But just understand that Dunning-Kruger effect is very real in capital raising. And you've got to be honest about where you are. I said, I know I'm hosting workshops and telling you that I see myself at this level, right? Because I'm still learning so much. And because of my position, I'm trialing different things for my own process as well, so then I can go and teach it. In fact, part of helping me learn to raise capital was also education as well, because it gave me a different way of thinking about it. So one of the things that most people want to know from us is, what are investors actually thinking? What are they looking at investing into? So we thought we'll just provide the survey and then just put it up there for you. Now, I know when I do this, most people straight look to that left column and they'll be trying to understand, how does my sector fit into, raising cap? The reality is all of us, anyone can raise money. You only need one investor to raise money, right? Just put it bluntly, right? But everyone, what's the interest level and so forth? If you're in health tech, we think, that's great, I'm at the top. And the only actual thing I really want to highlight for you is one, the amount of capacity of private high net worths in this space, as far as how active they are in this area. The second one is understanding how much people typically invest in the first round as opposed to what they invest in follow-on rounds. Now, I used to see this over and over where people would invest like 50 and 100K into first rounds, but then potentially put $1 million and above into second rounds, right? Because typically what happens is people will receive a 50K investment check and they'll be disappointed. And I kid you not how many times I've seen this from. And I always just like to educate founders that when an investor puts in sometimes 50 and 100K into your business, what they're actually saying to you is keep me interested. For some, it may all they want to be invest, and that's cool. For others, they're saying, look, like what you're doing, here's some money, keep me interested, right? And the more milestones you tick off, the more likely they're to keep participating. Now, by the way, we're getting, I think there's now 60 on the call, so good to see some good interest. So if you'd like to share where you're calling from, always love those updates. Okay, so now let's go on to the core principles, right? And apologies, I'm going to be drinking water, because it just smashes your throat talking when you get no feedback, no energy coming back from a live audience. Okay, so our core principles for raising money are really simple. Number 1 is to get ready. Number 2 is to stay ready. The third one is always be raising. Now, you'll never get this advice from a shareholder or typically an advisor as well. Now, I jokingly call it the agile capital raising method, which I stole from someone in the UK, which I think is brilliant. But really what I found is that what happens is we get conditioned that we gear up for these cycles of capital raising where we aim to raise capital for 2 to 3 months every 2 years, right? And that's pretty much what people land on. The challenge with that is that the market's not be right at that time. It might be a challenging time. The spotlight might not be on your area. You know, you may have not hit your milestone. There may be all sorts of reasons as to why it could be challenging. So the reason why I encourage this is because I've got so much value from being in consistent capital raising mode over the last sort of year and a half. And I've learned more about the process than I have in the sort of 10 years beforehand. Now, what's important for me is it doesn't mean I'm always taking money into the company. But what I've done is I've set my schedule up so that talking to investors is actually no different for me now than talking to potential clients, talking to potential partners, talking to meeting investors for the first time is literally just a normal part of my day, and I've got a process for it, right? And so I think when you get to capital raising being as part of business as usual, then it really starts to shift your mindset. So if you're going to have 6 meetings in a day, try and aim to have at least one of those being an investor discussion, right? So it's not so unfamiliar and you don't work yourself up in the lead up to it. The last one I think is the most important, which is get to a yes or no as fast as possible. So you'll see I set my processes up so that an investor can come to a quick decision, right? And the reason why I want that, because if someone's out, I'm actually really cool to know that they're out, right? I'll still keep them up to date with what our progress is, but I want to get to that yes or no as fast as possible for their benefit and also for my benefit as well. Now, founders people that are watching this are probably thinking, oh, you know, I wonder what investors think of this as a workshop. And don't know why that font's out as well. The reality is I get some of my best feedback about this workshop from investors because I'm just explaining exactly what would actually make their lives easier as well, right? And said, not what makes your life easier as a founder is also going to make their life easier as an investor. Now, understanding the principles from our side is our job as founders is really to take our company from being unknown to known to a success, right? And part of that job is we have to manufacture visibility for our company. There's a beautiful saying that's it's really hard to sell a secret. And that's no different to being a founder. It's very hard to sell a secret if people aren't aware of what you're doing. It's also very hard to manufacture serendipity. You know, we get that opportunity to meet the right person at the right time that can actually make a difference in your business. And I have absolutely experienced circumstances where one investor or one person can absolutely change the trajectory of your business. For me right now, I'm very fortunate, and I've received guidance from this from one of my shareholders. I have an engaged shareholder list that really assists my business in lots of different directions. And that all got created because of that awareness and providing an opportunity. Now, the steps that we take people through, I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but we've really laid out a 5-step process just to assist in providing that platform for direction. What percentage of investors, Mike's asked, what percentage of your investors have been willing to invest over Zoom calls with or without meeting in person? So Mike, just to give you, so I raised 1.5 last year, and literally only one of those investors, which was for a 250 amount, only one of those was basically that I met face-to-face. All the rest was done over Zoom, if that gives you context. Or Google Meet is my other one, right? And and just to be clear, Michael, part of this presentation is to help understand why that was able to happen. So the problem we didn't know we had, and this is why I love to refer to, and this is the problem that you're going to experience that you're not really going to know about. And I love using this example because Blockbuster, you know, before Wall Street Bets started help pushing their price back up, Blockbuster basically was smashed by Netflix. You know, they're at their peak of powers in sort of 2009, had, you know, I think it was like 100,000 staff or what it was, 9,000 stores. And effectively Netflix destroyed them, right, with their sort of on-demand access. Same with the taxi. So obviously it hasn't been completely destroyed, but what the Uber industry has done to taxis. Now, how does that relate to you and your capital raising? Well, it's really simple. I just want to highlight that if you don't make the process streamlined for investors, you lose the investor, right? I said, I had this example in Singapore where I introduced one of our clients to a Singaporean family office, right? Now, they were super interested in this company. So what they did was they sent through a bunch of questions about their technology. And what was really interesting was the company took 4 months to reply to those questions. That deal is dead. It is so dead that it has got no chance of revival whatsoever. And it's a simple way in which founders can screw things up. For me, it's actually embarrassing for me because I've, spoken kindly of them, and then all of a sudden the investor's not getting back. And then all of a sudden the company didn't respond to their simple questions in a 4-month period. Right. And this happens all the time for founders when they're going through a capital raise. And this is why that stay ready is also important. Now, going through the capital raising process, we always like to highlight to companies that, yeah, you will be competing with 30 other companies that are raising money. So whilst you're putting your opportunity out to the marketplace, you've got to understand that, you have competition. You're competing for every other single thing that investor can potentially put their money into. For example, they could be putting their money, instead of investing into your business, they could be investing into Bitcoin, they could be investing into Tesla, they could be investing into ARK, they could be investing into, any Afterpay, whatever it was. Just think about if someone invested into your company in 2016, they could have put that same money into Afterpay, and what would have been the difference in result? Now, this is humbling to always, but you've always got to remember that as a founder, that when someone invests into your company, it's a responsibility. But you always got to understand and know what your competition is. Teachers ask a question, what is more effective to promote need in capital raising? The founder, management, current profit, product, direction. I'll go, Tisha, just keep watching the presentation, and I think you'll understand it from a different perspective rather than just those aspects. Like that to me is a typical question like a VC would answer, and then they'll try and highlight that. But I think you'll understand, for me, this is about the process. This is not, there are certain things which help get attention, but this is really about the process. Okay, someone put up a hand, but I'm not sure why you put up a hand. If you have a question, please put it in the chat or put it in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to answer. If you put it in the Q&A, I'll do my best to not name you. If you put it in the chat, I'll mention your name. So apologies for that. A small tip for just anyone in the understanding that in the private space, and I'll give you my example, a lot of the investors that are actually in the private space often have commercial activities in this area as well. So there could be accountants, lawyers, advisors, brokers, corp finance, investment banks, whatever it may be. Typically, they're actually in this area as well. So people have this perception about what a high net worth investor is, but I'll just help you understand that often they have commercial activities. So a nice example for me is our lawyer, would register interest in our clients, or he would meet clients at our event and he'd hand over their business card. And because he hands over a legal business card, do you know how many people actually call him or contact him or reach back out? 0. Never has he had anyone follow him up about his potential investment because they've received the legal card. And I find that astonishing. And same with accountants have the exact same issue as well, because founders just take the approach that, he's giving me a legal card, he just wants to pitch me services. They don't realize that they were the ones that initially were investing and backing this space, right? And so I said, exact same goes for accountants as well. So just be really aware of that. Okay, moving on to the prepare part. As I said, feel free to ask questions while I'm talking. The first part is to create one or multiple deal rooms. Now, for me, I've actually set up 3 deal rooms, right? So the DD room is more for corporate or more professional investors because they've got certain processes they need to go through when they're actually making the investment. Another one is just financials, just for the last 3 years, financials in the financials room. And then I've got my main pitch deck room, right, that I actually use. So that's where I use the majority of my activity, and basically about 95% of investors end up in that room, right? When you're setting up your DD, just include this basic stuff as a starting point. Look, I don't need to go through this. There's plenty of online templates to talk about what you can put into a pitch deck room. This is just an example of mine for you, right? Now, I'll spend more time on this because this is the predominant one that people will use. So I've obviously got my pitch deck. I've got an investor survey. And the reason why I did that was I had investors keep on asking me, can you let us know the breakup of your investor database and blah, blah, blah. So what I did was I provided that for that so I could remove that question. And I think that goes to my mindset of when I'm actually raising capital, and the way I want to sort of educate on it is that anytime I get asked a question twice or three times, what I do is I think about how I can insert something, how I can insert either a frequently asked question or a document to get rid of that question. So for example, I've got my thesis and strategy document in my deal room. So that just basically helps an investor understand the way I'm thinking about my business. And as I said to you, what I've learned now is if there's a correlation between my thesis and their thesis, that's a really good start for a relationship. Right. And, someone talked about the arrogance. And so I don't see what I've come to learn more about this now. It's just a differing opinion on thesis for my area. If someone's not open to it, that's cool. There's someone, the way I think it, there's someone else that's relevant and available that is engaged with my thesis that can participate in my opportunity. There's plenty of people out there, right? Investors are not in a limited supply like it's made out to believe. And then the next part is then what I like to do with FAQs is I like to try and answer investor questions before they ask them. So once again, as I said, if I don't create the process as efficient for investor, there's two things that are going to happen. One, I could potentially lose them. The second one is that they could basically, how can I say it? They could feel like I'm not set up and professional in my approach. And I don't want to do that. I want to make it as efficient as possible for them. And I want to make sure that I want to get to the fastest yes or no as possible from their side. Okay. Now I put this in recently about the elevator pitch, because I realized sometimes founders actually don't get past the elevator pitch. We had a client called Essential Queensland, and Ray is a great guy. We've actually now done a podcast on it. I highly recommend you watching my YouTube video with Ray. But basically, he was actually really frustrated. And me and him had a pretty tough conversation at one stage, because he's like, Steve, I've been speaking to all these investors. I've joined you guys in London, Singapore, and I haven't been able to raise money. Right. And I was like, and I knew that he had decent investment interests. So then I tried to understand, okay, how come he's not raising? And this is before he went down this whole path of trying to, provide all this. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So I asked him, Ray, communicate to me what you do. Right. And so funny. So Ray basically spent the next 15 to 20 minutes telling me about what he does. And then I got to the point where I just stopped and I said, Ray, I'm going to stop you right here, because I said, for you as a person, I'm polite, so I'm going to listen to you. I said, the reality is no investor is going to listen to you talk for 15, 20 minutes about what you do. You need to get this down to a one-line statement about what you do. Right. Now, the funniest thing is when I did the podcast with him. Now, what's so funny is after that, Ray not only went on to raise capital, right, but he raised capital from one of our subscribers, but then also he raised $6.5 million last year, and also got acquired by an ASX listed company that was an old client of WI. Right. And I said, to me, that's the power of two things: ecosystem and communication. Really, really powerful message, I think for anyone. So be brief. I said, trying to get it down to, do you know how? Highlight problem. What we do is highlight solution, right? So for him, I said it absolutely changed his world, being able to get the elevator pitch right. And it's so funny when we talk about this, you can see the different look in his face and the different person he's become. Sometimes nailing your elevator pitch can want to be the best foundation for most of you going through a cap raising process. And sometimes people just can't get past that. Okay, so how do you build your profile? Now, the funniest thing is I always like to highlight at this stage is that we're 45 minutes in, and I'm just getting onto the part about how you can actually go through the capital raising process. Right. This is the stuff that people expect me to talk about. They don't really expect me to talk about all the stuff beforehand, but I can assure you, the foundational parts are just as right. And if you go speak to, Shane's on here is obviously very strong on the broking and done, more capital raisings than probably most people on here. He'll tell you the work they do on the behind the scenes in setting a company up for a raise. So building your capital raising brand. Now, I like to highlight this because building your capital raising brand, effectively, you've got few key leverage points that you can use. Now, what I like to highlight is you don't have to have all of these, and that's important to understand. But whatever you do have, you've got to communicate that. So if you've got a board and team with been there, done that experience, you've got to highlight it. If you've got board members that have successfully listed companies, you've got to highlight it. If you've got board members that experience successful exits as investors, highlight it. If you've got renowned investors that have already participated in your capital raise, you need to highlight it. And the reason is our role as founders when we're going through this is we've got to think about it like this. Most people now most people in our space, whether it be founders or investors, we're all basically borderline ADHD, right? So you've got to capture our attention within seconds to keep us to get our interest. And the easiest way to do that is humans are deletion creatures, right? So we're looking for the path of least resistance to gaining our own interest in something. So if you see a board member, if they see board members that in a certain area that they know, understand, recognize, and know they've been there, done that experience, that's a tick, right? That's one tick that you get. If you've got a team that's got that execution capacity, that's also another tick, right? Or got strong experience in a certain area, right? That's another tick. If you've got investors that are actually renowned, communicate that, because what you're effectively saying is this investor has already done due diligence on my business and they put their money in, right? Have you won any awards, right? The reason awards are useful because it's your industry recognizing your traction and recognizing what you've built. That could be helpful, especially for more technical businesses. If you've received any relevant grants, communicate it. I'm sure most of you would have seen with small cap listed companies, the types of things they put announcements about. They always put out this sort of stuff, right? Whenever they win awards, whenever they receive grants, whenever they get significant investors, I said, all these are different. And this is pretty much where I learned it from, right? Now, I will highlight sector. If you watch Bill Gross's TED Talk, there's a fantastic thing about sector. Now, we love the saying that a rising tide lifts all boats. When your sector is in the spotlight, when the light is on you, you've got to run hard. You've got to run as hard as possible. So for example, everyone would see the buy now, pay later space is red hot, right? One of my favorite stories is a company that was previously called Check. Now, when I talk about Check, people look at me, just to that blank eye look where they don't know what I'm talking about, right? But they were doing very well, had great traction, attracted some good investors. And then they changed their name to Before Pay. And Tarek, in making that move, was absolute genius move, because then all of a sudden he tapped into the buy now, pay later trend where every company titled Pay had an incredible run. And you see it, they've been able to raise, they've gone from startup to raising $13 million within 12 months and are now eyeing off an IPO that even senior people in the ASX are talking about. Right? And you sit there and go, that is one of the most brilliant ways to leverage off the growth in a sector. And Bill Gross talks about this, that for invest, sometimes timing is the most important factor. So when Tisha, you're asking your question, all the things, timing is so important in this actual process, right? And as I said, sometimes you know when your timing's on and you definitely know when it's off. But that's why I always say, just always be raising. And I said, I've seen it with some companies where they've struggled. And then all of a sudden, when their sector hits the spotlight, right, it's much easier for them to raise money because they've been building their awareness, they've been building their visibility, and investors are already familiar with their story, right? But the timing just happens to be right. And then the last one is metrics. Now, some people don't, typically we're looking for any type of growth metric that can be leveraged off. If you're a pre-revenue company, then you may need to leverage off other factors as well. Right? You don't need to have all 7 factors, but at least if you've got some to actually point to, that can help you from the generation of interest perspective. But the reason why I call it capital raising brand is because it allows people to go from unknown to known very quickly. It allows them within seconds to form an opinion as to whether they should do a little bit more deep dive onto what you're building. So I hope that makes sense on that capital raising brand part. I said, my team now, we've actually been doing training sessions internally specifically on that because we want to extract it from our clients. Now, one of the mistakes that I made, and I learned it after I screwed up a conversation with an investor, was that sometimes when we go into this cap raise, we end up talking too much about our business and what we do. And we forget that really all an investor wants to see is the end result. They want to understand what is the vision that you're looking to build. Right. Very few investors want to understand all the intricate day-to-day activities of what you're dealing with. In fact, I would say less than 5%. But unfortunately, the mistake that we make as founders is because we're a little bit chatty and we're passionate, of course, is that we communicate too much. So what I've done for myself is that I've really simplified. I actually give myself a script, right, that I follow just to make sure that I stay on track and I don't waffle. Right? Because if I don't have that, I find I can talk about things that are irrelevant to an investor, and I don't want to do that. Someone raised their hand. I noticed you raised your hand. Just feel free to ask it. If you want to stay private, ask in the Q&A box. If you want to let everyone else see your question, then just put it in the chat. I'm cool with both. Okay, so promoting your capital raise. These are all the different ways you can go about it. Right, so for me, this is about the awareness part. This is for where you're trying to generate interest and you're making people aware about what you do. These are all the different ways that you can do it, right? Obviously now with startup media, it's a lot easier for companies to now get some sort of awareness and visibility about what you're doing. I find for myself personally that it's easier to basically, when dealing with companies, you know, if they've previously been able to get media exposure or they're getting media exposure while we're promoting them, it's much easier for that interest generation process. Right. And when I say that, we can always generate interest. It just means about how do you keep on amplifying the results that you actually get. And I will highlight that at the moment, I find that investors tend to be more aligned and more strategic with their investments. And I don't know why my strategic has disappeared. And with that, it's just simply, like, as I said, for me, a lot of my shareholders that have just recently come on board are very active in our space and even have a lot of commercial activities as well. Okay, so when you're going into presenting mode, so you've done the awareness part, you've created the interest, you've built the visibility of your company. Now, when you've done that, the next step is to then decide, okay, now I need to take that from awareness and now I need to get momentum. And in getting momentum, I want to start to get what's called indications of how much interest there is from potential investors about what they're looking to invest. So we like to highlight that when you start to build that awareness, at some point you will start to think, do you know what, now is the time. And that's the time where you give yourself a 60 days registration of interest period. And the goal in that period is to get indications for at least 50% of your capital raise. And some people may ask, well, how do you get indications? Well, you just ask. So if you're having discussions with investors, you can ask the questions around, oh, how much do you typically like to invest? And if you can provide an indication of what you'd be looking to invest if you were, that would be great. You know, so it's just really asking in a sort of said, not in a hypey process, but just trying to get awareness from your side. But give yourself that 60-day call to action period, because this is the part where you actually generate momentum, right? And then at some stage, after you've got that ready, then the next stage is to actually put a deadline on the actual capital raise, right? And then once you've done that, that's when you go into full all-out mode of that momentum, whether it be doing one-on-one presentations, like with Zoom calls, like with Google Meets, Microsoft Teams, pitch competitions, virtual showcases, events, whatever it is, boardroom lunches, if you want to have people in your office, whatever it is, just start that call to action process. Because now what you've done is you've done all the work in building awareness and visibility. Now you're going through the promotional process and you're building up momentum. The next thing you need to do is you need to put a deadline. And the reason a deadline's important is because people typically only respond to deadlines. And if you look, the most beautiful example of a deadline-driven process is an IPO. What happens with an IPO is it centers everyone's energy and attention around the deadline in which an offer needs to close. And then same with funds, right? I found it really interesting with funds. What they do is they have a first close, they have a second, sometimes even a third close. But what they're doing is they're basically just building momentum, right? And that's also what you can do in your capital raise. So even if you're raising a large amount of money, you might want to have a smaller first close, right? As part of a momentum build, right? But really it's just a game of strategy. But all I want to help you understand is you've got that awareness part, you've got that consideration part where you're building up momentum. And then when it comes to decision time, there needs to be some sort of deadline which motivates people to act. The most frustrating thing for you as a founder is to have lots of people interested into your company and no one converting to be an investor. If you find that you're going through that process, then the next thing you need to do is actually put some sort of deadline, right, on your actual process, and then work everyone towards that deadline, right? Because the reality is, no investors and you, we're all no different to each other. We're typically driven, we typically work towards deadlines and what is right sort of in our face, in front of us at that point of time. And then as you go through that process, as I said, you open your capital raise for 60 days, and then it's virtual showcase, webinars, conference calls, emails, webinars, videos. Effectively what you're trying to do, and I explain this, if you think about this awareness stage that I've been talking about, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get at least 7 touch points during that process. Now you think about, okay, well, you know, that sounds like a lot. The reality is because right now we're all get so much information thrown at us, people that are interested in your business will happily look at whatever you send through. If they're interested, they'll watch it. I've had people where they just weren't responding to my emails at all, right? Or to my communications, but then all of a sudden they'd be watching my webinars, right? Or they'd be watching videos that I put out, or certain articles I would read. And I find that really interesting. And then all of a sudden they would act. So typically the way I always try and think about it is I'm just providing a platform for people to engage with me, right? And they will engage when they're ready. I've just got to keep on providing the platforms for them to actually do that. All right, seems to be quiet on the question front, which is unusual as we're sort of getting to this point. When I'm doing announcements, I typically, when I'm going through this process, I'm also putting out announcements. People always ask the question, oh, what do you put out announcements about? So recent awards, performance, recent media appearances, recent capital raisings, if you've brought in some funding, partnerships, deals, company milestones, all this sort of stuff, you can easily put out different content about how you're actually progressing. Right. And said there's plenty of different articles that what I recommend when you're communicating announcements, keep it really short, maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs at most. I typically like to use bullet points in my communications, and I like to keep them short. What I don't want to do is condition people to receive really long-winded emails from me, right? When I'm basically communicating to investors, I just want them to know that I'll keep providing updates, and it's up to them whether they want to engage or not. Right. And I find that's an efficient way for me to do it. And you can see an example of Collins Street, and actually Collins Street we promoted again last week with one of their announcements. Now, for me, gaining insight into the mind of the investors is everything. So what I learned, so this is actually from my Real Deal Room. And you can see that in the top questions, you can see that, you know, this really helps me understand what's of most interest to investors looking at my raise. So, you know, for all of you, within 5 seconds, you understand what's most important to investors, right? The first thing, so where it says, how do we explain the valuation, right? That's 61 times I never had to answer the question of how do I explain the valuation? You know, what are the upsell and additional revenue opportunities? You can see that's a high one. Basically, if you want to summarize it, the highest ones that investors are interested in my company is the valuation and what references I have for it, the growth model going forward, and then the exit model. And I think that's the easiest way to think about it for yourself if you're breaking it down into 3 categories. But I said, for me, I love this insight because before I went to raise, I actually had no idea. I had zero idea that this was what was important to investors in my raise, right? So having this data is really important for me. How do you deal with it? How do you deal if investors want to negotiate on share price as the process proceeds? Peter, can we save that one to the end? Because that's a bit more technical. But yeah, happy to answer that. Okay, know what your investor is thinking. So basically what's really nice is for me, when an investor expresses interest, I give them access to my deal room and I give them access to my Q&A. And what's cool is I get access to see what frequently asked questions they clicked on. The importance of that for me is that I understand what's most important to them, right? And once again, it's about making it efficient for them and making it efficient for me. So I know what their key points are. And, you know, I said, it's very rare you have that sort of intelligence when you're going through a capital raising process. And even more than that, we have this belief that there was a direct correlation between engagement and activity and actually transaction success, right? And what's really cool is in my deal room, right, out of the top 13 people in my deal room, 12 have now become shareholders. And for me, that is just such a powerful thing because as I said before, I had no visibility and awareness over this. Where I want to get our software to is that if I can if the software can predict the likelihood of a transaction or a successful capital raise between the investor and a company, that will make me super happy. And I'm sure over time, when we keep on collecting data, that we'll have the data to be able to do that. The last one is I mentioned to everyone about always be raising. And this is a beautiful example of me of an investor that basically after a year of looking at our opportunity decided to come on board. Right now, what I love is when people come into my deal room unprompted looking at opportunities. And that's what's interesting, because if there's doing it unprompted, then it typically means it's a time for me to actually engage with them. And that's proven valuable for me from a capital raising standpoint, because people have engaged with my deal room unprompted by me. And then I've struck up a conversation and they've become a share. And the reason simply being is the timing was right for them. But if I didn't have that visibility or that data, I wouldn't have known. Someone's asking a question. We have a dynamic business vision plan. I've done all you've stated in your webinar, but we are probably not getting access to the best. Serious and most genuine. How can we get help from? Okay, Arjun, that's a long question. Basically, what typically happens in this process is people like to shift responsibility. So for me, I would typically, founders have this belief that if someone doesn't invest in their business, that they're not a serious investor, which is actually not accurate. So Arjun, it's highly likely that you would have come across plenty of serious investors. They just didn't invest into your business. So typically what I'd say to you is, what things could you be doing that are not right? What's your process that you're actually going through? And that's where you'd have to actually break down the process. So the first thing I always do is I always own it. It's my fault. If someone doesn't come on board, there's something about my process. Maybe it's not the right time for them, but I always own that responsibility, right? So for me, that's the first thing that's always going through my head. And also the other thing I always think about is this investor likely, are these people I'm speaking to likely invest into other companies? And the answer is yes. So it means other people have been able to get them as shareholders, but they're not investing into my business. So once again, I would say, have a look at your own processes and really ask, are you doing it? And as I said, it doesn't mean I do it perfect every single time either. I absolutely still make mistakes going through the cap raising process. Can investors outside of Chris be in your deal room? No, they have to register and you have to invite them into your actual room. Okay, so the visualization benefits for me, the way I'm thinking about it is that those frequently asked questions, what happened is that I'd be having 3 to 5 hour discussions with investors. And now all of a sudden it got brought down to 30 to 60 minutes. And that was really important for me. Sometimes there'd be relational conversations, but it just made my process more efficient. And also I went from raising from 1 in 40 investors down to 1 in 10. And I always like to try and keep people in mind that to keep inside your conversion ratio, because effectively what you're trying to do is you're just trying to improve that conversion rate ever so, always trying to improve that process. Sorry, I think I've missed a question from Peter. How do you deal if investors want to negotiate? Oh no, I did. I'll come to that. I promise I'll come to that at the end, Peter. Is it free for investors to enjoy Chris? Yes, it is free for investors. Sorry, there's a question on the Q&A. Just give me 1 second. Has the deal room replaced the seminar table and virtual showcasing has replaced the seminars and the sandwiches, Frank, just to be clear. Press releases, yes, I definitely encourage press releases as well. Any media attention you can get in the actual process of raising capital is important. Okay, now let's go through the investor phase, and I'll do my best to go through this really quickly. So basically, investors are afraid of losing money. Everyone's really aware of that, right? And you have to understand this as a founder. When an investor's coming to look at your business, the first thing they're thinking about is all the ways that they can lose in this opportunity. Number one is just money. Number two is time. People don't appreciate how much time an investor spends on a business when they actually invest into it. As I said, I've got a lot of active shareholders and I'm forever grateful for the time that they add value to my company. Reputation is another one. If they've been publicly stated as in your company and something goes wrong with that, that's their reputation that's on the line as well. But the actual biggest one, the biggest loss aversion for investors is opportunity cost, right? As I said, they could have put money into Afterpay back in 2017, 2016, right? And instead they put into your business and you haven't been able to deliver. Right? Or you may have only 2 or 3x instead of 100x, or 10x. that's also what's in their mind from an investor's perspective. And the sad reality is, as founders, we don't really think about that. We just think, well, we've made the money, but they could have made more somewhere else, right? And that's the opportunity cost that goes along. Okay, so understanding the investor psychology. No investor wants to be the first one in, and then they don't want to miss out. So what does that mean for you? People always complain, oh, I'm just really struggling with the first investors. And this other investor said, look, if you have someone else lead the transaction, then we will follow, right? So getting lead investors is one of the biggest frustrations for most companies, right? And typically, if there's no lead, the time it takes to get a lead investor, it's just process. And that's why I recommend that awareness, and then that sort of going through that phase of the consideration part is all about building up momentum, building up interest, building out indications, etc. Because what you're effectively doing is you're manufacturing that first layer of investors sort of going into the company at one time, and you're sort of taking this off the table. Then what you really want to tap into is once those investors sort of start to come through, and this is the phases that you'll go through, right? And it takes time to get to this. Don't think this all happens at once. Then you go through the bandwagon effect, where people are just following others to come into your opportunity. And then the next stage that they're worried about is the fear of missing out. And this is just a very, you see it with IPOs. If you've seen every article about when VCs invest, they typically have a whole bunch of other people invest alongside them, right? Because they just join the bandwagon of those first lead investors, and then they don't want to miss out on going into the opportunity. And if you want to understand what an investor's thinking when they're going in, they're looking at your business, understanding, am I going to 5x and 10x my money? What does the company need to do for me to make 5 times my money? So I never tell a company, what my thoughts are about their valuation, but I will say to you, you need to think about, can this investor 5x or 10x their money at your current valuation? And if they can, what does that look like? What are the references? And, you got to provide the reasons as to why. The other thing that works for investors is short-term uplift, and obviously the process to an IPO. Pre-IPOs are the easiest opportunities for us to promote. Obviously, yield opportunities are also quite easy for us to promote at the moment as well. And then the next one is exit. So if there's a near-term horizon for an exit, then that also does assist in bringing an investor on board, or at least some sort of time horizon that they can put to. Now, there are VCs that will go online and say that, we want to invest for the long term, et cetera, et cetera. To be blunt, one of these factors has to come in, right? So the investors either have to be seeing how they can sort of 10x their money, right? Or they're thinking about how they can sort of get that short-term uplift, the yield, or move towards an exit. Okay. Any structure, so I've been asked, any comment on the structure of investment, example, con note, preference shares, ordinary equity, as it relates to founder trying to ensure an equal playing field for original. So look, for me, I've just done ordinary shares. Do note that if you are raising money from professional investment groups, they will have their sort of preferred structures. Typically, convertible notes are used often for bridging rounds, or if companies need to bring in capital sort of in a short time horizon. And then what that means is they can sort of guarantee a return of yield on money, but also it means that the investor can get a little bit of uplift as well going into the next round, or a discount going into the next round. So typically that's when a convertible note gets used. As far as preference shares, I haven't personally done preference shares, but obviously it's quite popular amongst VCs and other sort of significant investment groups. Said for me, the ordinary equity I've found has been the most straightforward way of me going forward. So what are the common mistakes that founders make? Overconfidence, right? I think is a great one. I said, going back to the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Often we think we're amazing, but we've got no real reason to understand why we're amazing, right? I said, just go into the process humble, and go into the process thinking about how you can consistently improve what you're actually doing. I'm willing to invest into the process. I said, this capital raising takes time, it takes money, it takes energy, it takes thinking. That's the reality. And I said, the more you treat it like business as usual, the more you actually don't really think about that much, and it just becomes second nature to you. And that's really the process where I'm trying to, get myself to, and obviously what I'm working on. Reliance on one investor. I've seen this mistake made time and time again, where founders stop their capital raising just to have basically for the potential of one investor. You keep raising capital until your capital raising is done. Yes, if you come across a professional investment group, they may sign for a period in which they want to have exclusivity at the opportunity. I can understand that if they're significant and relevant to your business. Outside of that, you keep on having conversations with investors, because your job is to fill your pipeline with potential investors who may be putting money into your business. And then you have the thing that you've got to do this dance where sometimes, money, you're doing that dance of strategic money and also active money as well, or it might just be passive money. Either way, you want to get momentum in your capital raise. And then reliance on one potential investor with no time pressure. Not putting time pressure on the process is one of the biggest mistakes that I've made throughout my career in doing that. And it's also basically meant that I've been punished a lot. I had internal challenges because I made this mistake, right? So for me, this is what successful capital raising requires. It requires education, it requires process, it involves software, and also obviously access to investors as part of it. And I'll just say that if you're simplifying your process, and always be looking to analyze, refine, repeat, improve, etc., right? Just to keep it said, just no different if you're doing marketing campaigns, sales campaigns, customer success, whatever it is, just always be looking to refine, repeat, and improve your process, right? So create templates, create scripts, create processes, all that sort of stuff, right? Because the whole thing that we're all going towards is confidence. We want to know that if we're going to go through a capital raise, we just want to have and not arrogant confidence. We just want to have that self-assured that if we do the things right, we've set our business up right, we're doing, we're doing everything we can to have that confidence that we are going to raise capital. And if you want to think about how to add layers of confidence, and think about how you can also add layers whilst you're building your business, layers of that brand capital to it. As you can notice, traction and business results is only one element, right, of what I talked about in capital raising brand. There's other things that investors are looking for. And sometimes, what I love about investors, and I said I've been on this side, sometimes they're just going into the story. They don't want to understand the grind that you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. They just want to back you in the building of your story. Okay, let's go through the questions. I said, so there's a lot of, by the way, the feedback, when I jokingly say it, but that actual feedback does mean a lot, because I said, I do this these are all the mistakes I've made, and I just don't want people to do it. So whether someone becomes a client of WI or not, I really don't mind. I just want to stop the BS that goes on in this space related to actually raising capital, and just provide really that process. Okay, so Peter, I'll kick off with you. How do you deal if investors want to negotiate on, look, mate, that's on different circumstance. So typically, it depends on what's happening with the company. If a company's in all out growth rate, then there's really not that much sort of room to negotiate. If anyone's like me, for me, when I go through a cap raising process, basically I get approval from the board about the price in which I'm looking to go at. So anything under that price would just be, it has to be something massively significant as to why I would do something different to the share price that's been negotiated. I can understand if a company needs to do a down round, or they need to lower the val or whatever. It really depends on their shareholders' agreement about what they would actually do. But that this specific question is all circumstantial and really depends on where the company's at that time. Okay, let's go through. Thanks, Arjun. Appreciate that. And capitals as well. It must mean you're shouting. Appreciate when someone's shouting nice things to me. Okay, so Francis, what is the city country where WI has raised the most capital? Does WI raise in HK? So literally, Francis, to give you an idea, we've had capital raise in pretty much every country. As far as, sorry, not every country, Hong Kong, Singapore, China. So for me, myself personally, I've got French investment banker as shareholders. I've got Vietnamese, Singaporean, New Zealand, Chinese, Canadian, and also, in chats with a UK investment group, right? Just to give you an idea. So next question, may be worth considering as part of a pitch deck, taxation incentives. So it's a good point here. May be worth considering as part of the pitch deck. Taxation incentives for early stage investors are available mainly in terms of non-refundable carry forward tax offsets up to 200K and modified capital gains treatment for shares held for at least 12 months. So that's the ESIC scheme. So if anyone wants to, happy to sort of, if you want to post any information to that on here, I'm happy for you to do that, because it could be relevant for people. But absolutely, if there's tax, you've got to utilize any potential advantage you can get. So feel free to add that to your slide. Okay. Someone's known me for a long time saying, you look significantly more healthy. Have you been working out? So as much as business as usual capital raising is, so is health. And I just will highlight one of the hardest parts for most founders is typically you find founders will put on a significant amount of weight in the first 2 to 3 years of our business. Exercise for me, like I will do anything to improve my health and also to improve my my physical energy and mental energy. There's literally nothing I won't try. If someone tells me it improves I'll give it a try at least, and then I just see what works for me. But absolutely, our mental health, our physical health, and our mental energy is super important for all of us. But thanks for that compliment. Loved your webinar. I've spoken to startups about various things they need to do for a fundraise, but your webinar neatly summarizes all the key points for startup founders consider when raising. Thanks, David. Appreciate that. I've missed most of your prezzo between Dandenong and the city. If the recording is available, okay, understand your eye. Thanks, appreciate that comment. How do you know when you are ready to raise? What are the minimum milestones we should hit before starting the process? Look, actually switching it on, I'd say it's all around awareness. I would say a little thing that you may want to do is that you may want to effectively try and have at least 30 to 50 investors interested in your opportunity, or at least sort of looking at what you're doing. Because if you've done all the work, if you spent 3 to 6 months getting 30 to 50 investors interested in your business, and you don't have to say you're raising money, say, look, we're looking at doing a capital raising this year, but we want to have some early discussions with investors, right? You can actually learn a lot from that process for investors. So I do highly recommend that. But I'll say that once you've got sort of 30 to 50 investors, then you've got indications for a decent chunk, like ideally 50%, but at least a good amount of your actual capital raise, then that's the time to switch it on and to crank up the energy and to put a deadline on the actual process. Okay. Anyone else have any more questions? I think I'm out of, oh no. How can we raise capital in other parts of the world and the NDS protect our company IP via Australia? So Tisha, that's probably out of my hands as far as the NDS protect our company IP. Sorry, the non-disclosure, is that non-disclosure agreement? Is that what you're talking about, NDS? Okay, cool. Look, this one's a hard one for founders because we typically get told by a lot of people about providing non-disclosure agreements. And, look, the reality is that I just gave up. Like no investors really like signing non-disclosure agreements, just to be really clear on that. And if you're doing that as a first step, that's a really bad move. You're basically, you're going to struggle to get interest. My suggestion is you need to have a high level of information that you are comfortable with for an investor to see that they can be interested in before you get them to sign an NDA. If someone wants to do a full DD, then absolutely get them to sign an NDA and then away you go, right? But just for the first layer of information, no one's going to sign an NDA to get that. But effectively, and also if the other thing to highlight that if what you're doing is so easy to copy, then what is your actual moat for your actual business? So that's the other thing to really think about. Peter, great question. What are the pros and cons of many small versus a few large investors? I can actually highlight that. I've actually got both. I've got a few large investors and also a few small and smaller investors as well. Look, I found that large investors will help me typically with my governance and things that I'm required to do for them because obviously they've got internal processes which I need to fulfill. Sometimes I said for me, I found it very valuable that when you do have a large investor, it assists you in actually attracting other investors as well, because it means someone else has already done DD on you. If your shareholder agreement is not right and you have a lot of investors, it can become an absolute pain in the ass. I've also experienced that. But yeah, trying to make things, it really comes down to, and the other pros of smaller investors is I've found that my smaller, like I said, investors that are putting sort of like 100K, maybe 150, 250, I've found them to be incredibly active with me and really help me with the business. And also I found that I can communicate certain challenges I'm having, and they really help me in sort of dealing with those challenges. So I've got, I've got pros and cons for both. Mostly the cons is more around the administrative aspects, because that tends to get a little bit more cumbersome the more shareholders that you have. Hope that answers your question, Peter. Any other questions? I can't believe we're already out of questions already. We've still got quite a few people on here. Feel free to ask. Like I said, I'll do my best to answer everyone's questions as part of this process. Trust me, I understand how frustrating capital raising is. This is not the time to be shy. I'll just have a quick drink while anyone's writing. All right, no one's right. Okay, so for me, look, if there's no more questions, as I said, I'm happy to stay here and answer as many questions as possible. Look, I just want to say thank you everyone for your time. I really appreciate it. And look, so we understand the journey that you go through as founders. I said, I'll just give that following advice. Raise as much money as possible in the next 6 months, because I said, none of us know what the second half of this year looks like. You got to think you cannot have everything booming and at the same time have such high unemployment and all the challenges that the world's facing, like, where they're talking about the second strain of COVID and all that sort of stuff. And people get into this mindset, oh, the vaccine's coming, that's going to save everything. Well, the reality is Australia could not get 70% of the population to download an app. How can they get 70% of the population to actually get a vaccine? So for me, I'm assuming that this is the environment that we're going to be operating in for some time. And each of us have to do the absolute best we can to make our presence felt. And that means making ourselves more visible, more aware to people. And I said, doing what we need to do. And I said, this advice I'm giving you, I'm taking it myself as well. Like, I am actively having conversations with investors because, I want to finish off my Series B. And obviously I want to invest more into what I showed you with Chris, because the direction of our business is AI-driven capital raising and obviously digital investment banking tools. And capital is required to do that. So I'll be raising as much. Said everyone tries to get to this perfect timing of situation. For me at the moment, there is no such thing as timing. It is just simply, we as founders should be raising as much money as possible. Thanks, Shania. Appreciate that comment. I hope I said your name correctly. And yes, I'm really glad you got value from it. Christian, thank you so much for the feedback. Ali, thanks for raising your hand. I hope that's like a wave, maybe. Is that what it is? Appreciate that. Mike, this is the best one. Any tips to keep your head up and motivated after hearing lots of no's? Honestly, it's normal. Like, I got rejected, 2 days ago? It's just so normal, the rejection process. The best thing is you just got to, you learn this from BD, right, Mike? So basically just keep momentum up, keep driving people into your pipeline of investment opportunity. Learn from your no's, take the advice that you get from your no's. And look, to be honest, I've found that no's sometimes end up being the most valuable feedback that I get, especially if they actually tell me why they're saying no. And I said, I'm happy to work and have conversations with investors. I'm happy for them being engaged as not. But yeah, that's the way I keep myself motivated. And also I find that, in learning from that, sometimes it can just be a great thing for your own business model as well. Thanks, Louis. Appreciate that. And by the way, Mike, I hope that helps you. Like I said, I'm not giving you exact technique, but just that consistent driving forward and consistently having investors in your pipeline to have conversation with is because what basically drives founders is hope, right? If we have got no hope, then that's a dark place to be in. But even if we get rejected, at 12 o'clock, and then at 12:05, we have someone saying that they want to have a discussion with us, all of a sudden our brain kicks into, okay, what's next? I've got this crazy thing with my brain where I'm talking about being rejected now, but there's this strange thing with my brain that my brain deletes when I get rejected, and then I forget about it. So, I don't know how I could impart that, but it just does. Thanks, Lewis. I hope I said that right. Well done, and love your special focus and positive area. Thank you. Thanks, Warren. Appreciate that. All right. The number one question I get all day is, do I have a recording of this? So yes, I will make the recording available for 48 hours. I do hope that no one shares it. Said, it's my personal stuff and I give my personal experiences. And you guys, look, the reason we have so many people coming on these is you realize that no one actually really wants to teach anyone about raising money. Right? Actually really raising, you don't see any investment bankers out there talking about how they drive their capital raising process. You don't see corporate finance guys doing it because they make so much money. I'm just fortunate I've got a business in this area, and there's a mechanism which obviously, relates to how I can generate revenue. And that's my biased interest, right? And I make that very clear. But the reality is that outside of that, people really, said the only education in this area is that, how can I raise from VCs? And to me, that's just a very, very small part of this process. And, we just want to make sure that people have as many options available to them as possible, and they simplify their own processes. All right. Can I show to my co-founder? Yeah, of course. Co-founders are fine. Like anyone that's involved in your business that actually helps with your capital raising, I'm really happy. I'm happy for them to see it. As I said, I really do want to add value. Look, me doing workshops consistently sort of is not ideal for my, but said I know the value that it adds to you guys as founders. Thanks, David. Appreciate yours as well. All right. I think on that note, I'm going to stop the recording for the moment.